So behind me here in Babylon is the place where the ziggurat of Babylon stood.
Babylon is often treated as an ancient wonder already mapped and understood, every stone accounted for. But beneath a long overlooked quarter, archaeologists recently uncovered something unexpected. Stratified soil packed with intent, charred tablets and sealed rooms holding enigmatic objects.
Holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says, it's an amazing feeling.
Why had this place been buried with such care? As they dug deeper, the team unearthed more than artifacts. They found traces of a shadowed truth that could challenge everything we know about Babylon. Was this the part of history someone tried to hide? Let's delve into what happened when scientists opened a forbidden vault beneath Babylon. New secrets in ancient Babylon. For centuries, Babylon has been treated like the world's most well-studied ancient city, as if every stone had already confessed its story. The towering ziggurats, the legendary gates, the palatial complexes, the remnants of kings who carved their names into clay and history alike. All of it seemed mapped, measured, photographed, catalogued, and reassured to belong to the realm of the known. Archaeologists believed Babylon had no more surprises left, just dust, heat, and familiar ruins repeating the same old lessons. But history has a talent for shifting under our feet. In the last few decades, discoveries around the world have quietly challenged the neat timeline we once trusted. Temples older than agriculture, astronomical devices centuries ahead of their time, and relics so strange they feel misplaced by thousands of years. Every new finding seems to whisper the same unsettling truth: that our understanding of the ancient world is not just incomplete, but possibly scrambled in ways we're only beginning to realize. And then came the Alfiadia discovery. The excavation was supposed to be routine, nothing more than a rescue operation to salvage whatever was left before modern development swallowed the land. Leading the mission was archaeologist Quttan Abbas Hassan Aboud, a man known more for his steady patience than for dramatic announcements. Site 193, tucked quietly within the Alfiadia district, wasn't expected to produce anything extraordinary. If anything, the team anticipated a handful of scattered artifacts and a few architectural fragments. Useful, but nothing headline-worthy. Yet the ground had other plans. The very first day seemed ordinary enough. Workers unearthed cracked pottery, worn bricks, and weather-beaten tools, the usual archaeological warm-up act. Then, with the sun lowering and the heat easing, someone brushed dirt away from a small bronze weight. It glimmered faintly, almost defiantly, as though it had been waiting for centuries to be seen. A nice find, sure, but nothing wild. Hours later, everything escalated. The soil began yielding objects far stranger and far better preserved than expected. Clay tablets, sculpted seals, fragments of jewelry, and decorative pieces that seemed unusually intact. Field notes from the day carry an unusual tension. Whoever buried these relics didn't merely hide them. They tried to alter their meaning, as if certain lines of history were too dangerous to be read again. The strangest part, sacred objects like incense cups and offering vessels were buried beside broken spearheads and shards of armor. Items Babylonian culture traditionally kept worlds apart. Holiness and violence were rarely placed side by side unless something desperate was unfolding. The ground itself added an extra layer of unease. Workers described the soil as unnaturally dense, compressed almost as if tamped down in a hurry. Despite the blistering desert heat, the air around the trench remained oddly cool. And lingering in the breeze was a faint metallic tang, subtle but impossible to ignore. These weren't the signs of casual disposal. They hinted at a burial done with intent, deliberate, methodical, and strangely urgent. By evening, the atmosphere on site had shifted. The team understood they were no longer dealing with a simple excavation. They had stumbled into a secret intentionally sealed beneath Babylon's once bustling streets. A secret someone, long ago, didn't want anyone finding. Naturally, the archaeologists pushed deeper. Curiosity may not always be safe, but it is relentless. Soil samples from various depths revealed a pattern no one expected: layers of earth pressed in clean, uniform stages, with little of the chaos normally left by fires, floods, or city collapses. Instead of nature's random fingerprints, the land showed the quiet order of human interference. Someone had built these layers. Then came the scans. Ground-penetrating radar lit up with shapes that made no sense. Long, hollow spaces, empty corridors, and sealed chambers deeper than any known structure in that district. Normally, voids like these would collapse over centuries, but somehow they remained perfectly intact, like pockets of air trapped inside a vast, ancient lung. It was as though something beneath the city had been designed, architected to remain untouched. The revelation sent ripples through the entire team. If these buried spaces had survived millennia, then they might hold more than everyday relics. They could carry the weight of history rewritten, or worse, history intentionally erased. The line between archaeological discovery and something far older and more ominous began to blur, and the questions grew heavier. Why was this part of Babylon buried so completely? Why did the layers of earth look more like protective seals than natural sediment? And why did the voids beneath the ground feel less like rooms and more like warnings? As these thoughts circulated, official documentation of the site continued. The excavation, led by Aboud and overseen by authorities including Sohail al-Tamimi, was divided into two major sectors, A and B. Sector A, spanning roughly 6,000 square meters, revealed two starkly distinct archaeological layers. The first belonged to the Sasanian period, though erosion and modern damage had taken a heavy toll on its remains. Beneath it, however, lay the true prize, a far older, far better preserved layer from the old Babylonian period. In a city known for its high water table and damaged strata, finding intact layers was already unusual. Finding them in such pristine condition was unprecedented. Sector B, a larger 9,000 square meter area, unveiled residential units, rooms of varying sizes likely used for living, storage, or specialized work. Their walls, floors, and layouts offered an intimate look at everyday Babylonian life, preserved in a way that felt almost intrusive, as if stepping into homes whose owners had left only moments before disaster struck. Pottery vessels, cuneiform tablets, and beautifully carved cylinder seals emerged one after another. The tablets, Babylon's ancient legal documents, were sometimes wrapped in clay envelopes, an early security system that protected their content from tampering. These items should have painted a clean, detailed picture of the city's daily rhythm. But the signs of deliberate sabotage, the scorch marks, the carved-out inscriptions, the unnatural soil layers, kept telling a different story, a darker one. And as the team pushed deeper, the strange feeling lingering over the site thickened. It was no longer just about what they were uncovering, it was about what someone, thousands of years ago, clearly wanted to stay buried. Signs of deliberate burial and fire. For most excavations, soil is simply soil, layers of dust and time. But at this site, the earth behaved more like a storyteller that refused to stay quiet. The deeper the team dug, the more it revealed patterns no one could explain, as if Babylon had tried to bury not just its past, but its mistakes. It started with the ash. Several meters down, the archaeologists found thin, perfectly even bands of ash stretching across long, unbroken lines. At first glance, they looked like the remnants of some ancient bonfire or the ashes from domestic hearths. But that theory didn't last long. Once the samples reached the geologist's tent, the results came back almost immediately. These layers had been exposed to temperatures far beyond anything a home fire could produce. We're talking extreme heat, the kind you'd need specialized furnaces to recreate today. The discovery raised eyebrows. Fires burn unevenly, nature is messy, but these bands were smooth, uniform, engineered. It was the kind of precision that didn't happen by accident. Something, or someone, had created these layers on purpose, and that was only the beginning. As the team traced the ash horizontally, they realized they were looking at a controlled burn that spanned a wide area. It wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was coordinated, almost mechanical in its execution. This kind of uniform destruction usually shows up in three contexts in ancient Near Eastern archaeology: ritual purification, battlefield sterilization, or intentional land clearing for rebuilding. But even those explanations felt too small for the scale here. These layers weren't thick with debris or charred belongings. They were strangely clean, as if whoever set the blaze focused on burning only what mattered. One researcher commented, half jokingly but only half, that it felt like they were studying not a city's remains, but the aftermath of a deliberate purge, one designed with precision instead of panic. And then came the beams. Buried within the ash were partially charred wooden supports. Oddly, the underside of each beam was burned while the top was almost untouched. Fire, of course, doesn't usually burn upward from under the ground. Something below those beams had ignited and forced its way upward in a controlled, contained blaze. Whatever happened here didn't behave like a natural fire. It behaved like something meant to seal from the bottom up. Once enough evidence was gathered, the team gathered in the dim light of the camp tent to compare notes, and three theories emerged. Some scholars suggest Babylon may have fallen victim to plague, invasion, or internal collapse, prompting priests to call for a ritual cleansing by fire, a desperate attempt to purify the city not only physically but spiritually. Others argue the flames were more practical, a way to clear the ruins quickly for ambitious reconstruction. Yet even this explanation falters when confronted with the strange precision of the burn patterns and their inexplicable reversals, details that seem far too deliberate to be random. Then there is the theory that chills even seasoned historians. Perhaps the fire wasn't meant to cleanse or rebuild at all. Instead, it was a seal, designed to contain something buried deep beneath the city, a force or secret too dangerous to be unleashed. The very earth, scorched and rearranged, may have been a warning or a lock marking Babylon as both grave and prison. The idea hung in the air like smoke. It felt dramatic, even sensational, but the soil layers were beginning to support it more than any practical explanation. Suspicion hardened into unease when the soil chemists mapped out the sequence of layers. It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental. It was a pattern, a repeating system. Layers of ash alternated with patches of clean soil, rising and falling in a deliberate rhythm. Ash, then soil, then ash again, and soil once more. Almost like a barrier in installments, laid down intentionally, each layer reinforcing the one below it. Nothing like this had ever been documented in Mesopotamian archaeology. Not in Babylon, not in Sumer, not in Akkad. It was an architectural approach to burial, but not of people, of something else. The deeper they went, the quieter the camp seemed to grow. Even the chatter of workers faded. The site had a mood of its own now, a kind of held breath. Some locals began murmuring old warnings about the deeper Babylon, a phrase usually reserved for folklore. Researchers laughed it off at first, but only at first. When the team ran another round of subsurface scans, their equipment registered faint, unnatural echoes, hollow spaces where none should exist. Chambers, man-made, sealed beneath a city that had already buried itself multiple times. Standing at the edge of the open trench, the lead archaeologist felt a cold certainty settle in. If fire was meant to erase something, it had failed, because beneath the burned layers, something had survived. And what they found next wasn't debris or pottery or lost tools. Encrypted tablets and defaced writings. For a moment, the excavation team thought they had reached the end of the mystery. The burned layers were already strange enough, the sealed chambers unsettling and the soil patterns downright unnerving. But the truth was waiting just one level deeper. Quiet, dusty, and packed with clay tablets that should not have survived at all. When the chamber was finally cleared and the lamps were lowered inside, the team froze. All around them were clay tablets, hundreds of them, stacked, leaned, and arranged with the precision of a secret underground library. Whoever built this chamber didn't just toss tablets inside, they curated them. They organized knowledge like someone expecting future readers or warning them. What shocked the team most was the preservation. These tablets should have crumbled centuries ago, yet many were almost pristine, protected by the rapid burial and oddly perfect seal of the chamber. But if preservation was the first surprise, the contents were the second and far darker. At first, the researchers were hopeful. Babylonian archives normally mean administrative records, grain counts, tax lists, temple inventories. The mundane stuff, the kind that makes historians happy and everyone else yawn. But as soon as the first stack was lifted to the surface, the mood shifted. Almost every tablet showed damage, scars carved with a force that felt angry, deep gouges sliced through entire sentences, violent scratches ripped across symbols as if someone wanted to silence them forever. Some tablets were cracked cleanly through the center, not by time but by deliberate pressure, the strokes stopping mid-word. This wasn't aging, this was erasure. Even the hardened archaeologists fell quiet. Tablets don't normally come out looking like they've survived an attack. As more pieces were cleaned, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Lines weren't scratched at random. They were targeted. Specific phrases, specific names, specific warnings. Whoever defaced them knew exactly what they wanted gone. The destruction was hurried too. Some inscriptions ended abruptly, the stylus stroke frozen in motion as if the scribe had been interrupted or frightened before completing the thought. The damage looked less like vandalism and more like censorship in crisis mode. One tablet had its entire final paragraph hacked away with such force that chips flew into the pottery around it. Another tablet carried neat, precise writing at the top and frantic, scratched-out warnings at the bottom. The tablets told two stories, one carefully written, one desperately destroyed. Despite the violent erasures, not everything was lost. Some lines survived, partial, fragmented, but enough to ignite debates that would last for months. A few phrases, once reconstructed, stood out. The watchers beneath the river, the sealed chambers of the deep, warnings from the scribes of the fifth king. Those who examined the text disagreed immediately. Some scholars insisted these were nothing more than mythological references, typical ancient metaphors about spirits, gods, and submerged worlds. Mesopotamian literature is full of poetic imagery, after all, but others argued the opposite. The phrasing appeared on multiple tablets, the symbols were unusually consistent, and the repeated warnings didn't sound like ritual poetry at all. They read like reports. One linguist noticed that the scraped-out sections often preceded words related to binding, containment, and older Sumerian glyphs, referencing bodies beneath the floodplain. Whatever the tablets once described, someone went to great lengths to make sure the full story never survived. By the time news of the discovery reached local universities, academic disputes erupted almost instantly. The conservative camp insisted this was metaphorical writing, part of a lost cultic tradition. Fire, burial, watchers. These could all belong to symbolic language, maybe tied to purification rituals or underground sanctuaries. But the dissenting camp, usually the quieter side, refused to yield this time. If it was myth, why the violent erasure? Why the hurried destruction? Why store censored texts in a sealed archive designed to last? And why were the same phrases showing up across multiple layers of tablets written by different scribes in different decades, using different dialects? Little by little, the metaphor theory began to feel like a convenient shield, one that protected modern scholars from confronting a darker possibility, that something had happened in Babylon that the scribes themselves regretted writing down. Then came the most disturbing discovery of all. There were gaps, empty spaces in the archive where tablets should have been. Perfect rectangular depressions in the dust, slots that once held knowledge but were now clean, smooth, and undeniably empty. Someone had removed these tablets before sealing the chamber. Not dropped, not broken, not eroded. Removed. The implications were deeply unsettling. Had they been moved to safety, consumed by fire, hidden elsewhere, or deliberately erased so that certain warnings would never survive, even in this underground vault? The missing pieces made the tablets that remained feel even more deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle that someone had tried to solve or hide thousands of years ago. And still, the narrative persisted. Every tablet, every scratch, every missing piece pointed toward the same unsettling truth. The scribes knew something. They feared something. And they tried, in their last frantic hours, to make sure future generations understood the danger. As the team cataloged the last row of tablets, the archaeologist leading the excavation paused. She noticed a pattern in the warnings, subtle directional hints embedded in the fragments. Several damaged lines seemed to point toward the chambers beneath, a descent, or the sealed path of the Watchers. Her heart pounded as she matched the phrases to the layout of the site. The tablets weren't just warnings. They were pointing to a location, and soon, the excavation team would discover the place those warnings pointed to. The hidden staircase and sealed chamber. For days, the dig had followed a predictable rhythm. Dust blowing across broken walls, shovels scraping rock, someone calling for a water break. Nothing suggested that the most important discovery of the entire excavation lay under what looked like an ordinary corner of an old scribal room. It was a hairline crack that changed the course of everything. A junior archaeologist noticed it while brushing away dirt. A thin fracture slicing across a large stone slab that blended in a little too perfectly with the surrounding floor. On a whim, he tapped it lightly. The sound, a deep, hollow thump, rolled through the room and stopped everyone mid-sentence. Stone floors shouldn't echo like empty chests. The team exchanged looks, the kind you give when you realize the story just took a turn. Within hours, equipment was moved in, lights were focused, and the slab became the center of attention. Ground-penetrating tools confirmed it. There was a void beneath, but not a natural pocket of air. Something shaped, something built. They couldn't risk collapsing whatever was below, so the removal became a slow, surgical operation, lifting the slab one fragment at a time. Dust floated in narrow beams of sunlight. Nobody breathed normally until the final wedge came free. And then it happened. A thick wave of air rushed upward, hitting them in the face like the exhale of something ancient. It was icy cold, far colder than buried air should be, and carried a strange metallic tang that burned the nostrils. Even through their masks, the sting was unmistakable. Ancient tombs smell of rot, dirt, time, not chemicals. Whatever this was, it had been sealed tight for a reason. When the dust finally settled, a narrow cavity was revealed, just wide enough for a person. And spiraling down into the darkness was a staircase no one was prepared for. The staircase looked impossibly precise, each step carved clean, as if cut yesterday rather than thousands of years ago. The walls were smooth to the point of unnatural, with no carvings, no prayers, no builder's marks. Babylonian builders loved leaving their names, their dedications, their little blessings to the gods. It was part skill, part pride. But here, nothing. The deeper the descent, the colder the air became. Their lamps struggled to pierce the darkness, as though the shadows resisted. The staircase wound down in tight spirals, almost vertical in some sections. It felt less like a passageway and more like a screw boring into the earth. No one said it aloud, but the absence of inscriptions bothered them. Structures this carefully made usually celebrated their purpose. This one hid it. About halfway down, the symptoms began. A few team members reported sudden dizziness. Another felt an odd pressure around his temples, like a tightening band. Someone else complained that the air felt heavy, thick enough to chew. Even seasoned workers, people who had crawled through collapsed temples and suffocation-prone tunnels, grew uneasy. Mask filters were replaced, but the sensation didn't lift. It wasn't lack of oxygen, it was something else. At the bottom of the spiral, the staircase opened into a low, circular room. Their lights flickered across chaos. Toppled lamps, cracked bowls, rush pens scattered in every direction. Clay seals lay shattered around the floor as if someone had stomped them in a hurry. Whatever had happened here, it ended fast. Some bowls still held traces of ink, now dried into black flakes. A few styluses were snapped in half. A writing mat lay curled in a corner, as though abandoned mid-sentence. Tools that normally lasted decades had been discarded like debris during a frantic escape. No footprints remained, but the room radiated panic. Yet despite the hurried exit, nothing had been looted. Everything lay where it fell, as though nobody wanted to take a single thing with them. The team moved cautiously, documenting every object before touching it. The deeper they entered the chamber, the clearer it became that this place was never meant for long-term work. It felt like a temporary checkpoint, a threshold. Behind a partially collapsed clay wall, another passage revealed itself, narrower, colder, and far worse. This chamber was lined with bones. Hundreds of fragments covered the floor, arranged in eerie, meticulous patterns. Finger bones laid side by side, larger joints grouped neatly, smaller bones separated into clusters divided by thin ridges of clay. It was too structured to be random and too intentional to be ceremonial. This wasn't burial. This was containment. Forensic tests later confirmed the bones had been cut apart after death. The hands and fingers had been deliberately separated, a chilling echo of the Mesopotamian ritual known as the disarming of the soul, a practice meant to keep spirits from rising or seeking revenge. 2 workers refused to re-enter the chamber after seeing the arrangement. One said the pattern felt too perfect to be human, but the bones weren't even the worst part. Beneath them, hidden in shallow stone basins, was a dark, iridescent liquid. It shimmered in greens, blues, and oily blacks, though the surface never truly rippled. The smell was immediately alarming, sharp, metallic, and nauseating. Instruments detected mercury, arsenic, and lead in concentrations no natural environment could produce. The pools weren't accidental. They were engineered. The chamber felt like the ancient equivalent of a nuclear containment room. And still, something lay deeper. The instruments began to detect faint vibrations, so low they were almost below human hearing, like a tremor pulsing through the stone. The team stared at one another, suddenly aware that every layer they'd uncovered had pointed to the same truth. This place wasn't sealed to preserve history, it was sealed to trap it. As the last measurements were taken, a draft of impossibly cold air brushed across the chamber floor, slipping out from a thin crack in the far wall, a place the builders clearly never wanted touched again. The Vault of Horror and its warning. The deeper the excavation team pushed beneath Babylon's ruined district, the more the ground seemed to resist them. The toxic pools, the eerie bone arrangements, the suffocating air. Each layer felt like the city was whispering, "Turn back." And yet, beneath all of that, the scanners picked up something even more impossible, a final barrier. At first, the team thought the machine was malfunctioning. The readings showed a perfectly uniform density, no cracks, no joints, no gaps. But when they cleared the soil, every doubt dissolved. Buried under centuries of earth was a single, flawless slab of stone, nearly 2 meters thick. No mortar, no mud brick, no seams. Just one monolithic block so smooth it reflected their flashlights like dull steel. Carved across its face were faint yet deliberate symbols, curving strokes and angular cuts identical to the fragments earlier found on the defaced tablets. Scholars gathered around them, whispering translations. Containment. Binding. To forbid passage. And most unsettling of all, silence the watchers. No one would say it out loud, but the implication hung in the stale air. This was not a door. This was a prison. Opening the vault became an ordeal of patience and fear. For weeks, the team used slow, precise cutting tools, shaving microns at a time. Every vibration felt risky, like they were tapping on the lid of something that might break. When the final cut connected, the slab shifted with a low, resonant groan, almost like a breath long held. Then came the air. A violent burst of ammonia-heavy, chemical-laced gas exploded into the corridor. Masks snapped into place, people stumbled back. 2 workers fainted on impact, another vomited before he could turn away. Whatever was down there had been sealed for a reason. Once the air thinned enough to proceed, lights were lowered into the chamber, and in seconds, talking stopped. Breathing stopped. Even the hum of the generators felt drowned out. Lining the walls were rows of skeletal figures standing upright in recessed alcoves. Not slumped, not collapsed, arranged. Their spines were twisted into unnatural curves. Their jaws were wired shut with corroded bronze like someone wanted to silence them even in death. Some had arms bent backwards, bones snapped and reset in poses no living body could endure. And then it got worse. Several alcoves held cages built not from metal or wood, but from bones. Human bones interlocked like macabre latticework. Inside those cages were smaller skeletons, children, servants, or possibly the unfortunate participants of a ritual no one wanted to imagine. A dark resin fused some of the bones together, creating a glossy, amber-like sheen. Tests later showed it was a preservative compound similar to those used in elite burials, but far more concentrated, almost weaponized. None of these bodies had decomposed naturally. They were placed, arranged, contained. By this point, even the bravest archaeologists kept glancing at the exit. At the center of the chamber, scattered between pillars of shadow, were pits filled with stagnant, discolored liquids. Mercury, arsenic, lead. Heavy metals so concentrated the surface gleamed with oil-slick colors. Greens, violets, blacks that caught the light in rippling illusions. Some pits bubbled despite the cold. Others pulsed gently, as if stirred by an unseen current. Were these pools meant for preservation? Ritual dissolution? Traps for intruders? No one could agree. In emergency meetings that stretched past sunrise, scholars wrestled with the impossible question of what the vault truly was. Some suggested it might be a penal chamber, a place for prisoners condemned to fates far worse than death. Others imagined a cultic site, reserved for rites so forbidden even ancient society had outlawed them. Another theory cast it as a quarantine vault, meant to seal away the bodies of those struck by disease, never to return. Still others whispered of a failed experiment, alchemy, medicine, or something far more forbidden, its purpose lost to time. And then there was the theory no one dared speak aloud, the one that lingered in every shadowed corner of the room, that the vault was a containment zone for those tied to the enigmatic Watcher's texts, figures described not as criminals or worshippers, but as profoundly dangerous. None of the explanations felt complete. None offered safety. Only one inscription was found inside the vault, scratched faintly behind a row of upright skeletons as if the writer hadn't wanted to be seen. 9 words. "Do not wake what was bound beneath the stone." The handwriting was shaky, desperate. And suddenly the bone cages, the chemical pits, the wires through jaws, they clicked into place as pieces of a much larger, much darker attempt to keep something sealed. Even the pit at the center of the chamber, a shaft so deep the strongest lights were swallowed whole, seemed less like architecture and more like a wound in the earth. Some kind of descent, or escape route, or tomb for something that had never belonged among humans. When the vault was resealed and the official reports diluted into vague archaeological jargon, one truth remained. This discovery wasn't about death. It was about fear. A fear so great the earliest rulers of Babylon built layer after layer of walls, rituals, toxins, and bones to imprison it. To understand that fear, researchers had no choice but to look backward, far beyond the ruins and dynasties, to the earliest days of Babylon itself. The old Babylonian Empire, re-examining the past. When news of the underground vault leaked, quietly in whispers that spread faster than any official report, historians and archaeologists from every corner of the field suddenly found themselves staring backward into Babylon's past with fresh, uneasy eyes. The discovery didn't just raise questions, it challenged the very foundation of what everyone thought they knew about the first Babylonian Empire. After all, if a civilization creates a vault built from engineered stone, laced with mercury traps, and filled with bound skeletons posed like warnings, then something in their past must have driven them to it. And so, researchers plunged into history, hoping the answers were somewhere between Babylon's rise and its darkest fears. The old Babylonian Empire, dating roughly from 1894 to 1595 BC, emerged in the aftermath of the Great Sumerian collapse. After the fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur came centuries of instability, rival city-states, small-scale wars, shifting alliances. Then the Isin Larsa kings rose, reigned, and eventually fractured. Out of that chaos, Babylon, a city once considered minor and unremarkable, began to ascend. By the time Hammurabi solidified his rule, Babylon wasn't just another Mesopotamian kingdom. It was the kingdom, a political and religious powerhouse that shaped law, trade, mythology, and culture for centuries. Most people remember Hammurabi for his laws, but what's often forgotten is how much superstition, ritual, and fear shaped those laws. And those fears? They might be the missing link to understanding the vault. One of the biggest challenges in studying early Babylon is that the city refuses to cooperate archaeologically. Not out of malice, just geology. Babylon was built on land with a high water table, meaning anything buried too deep eventually decayed, collapsed, or washed away. Add in thousands of years of rebuilding as Babylon was constantly reshaped on top of older layers, plus looting, soil erosion, and even ancient brick recycling, and you're left with disappointingly little. This scarcity of physical evidence leaves huge gaps that the vault's discoveries now threaten to fill in ways nobody expected. To understand Babylon's fears, researchers turned back to what did survive: the written records. The Code of Hammurabi is the most famous source, but beyond the legal punishments, cut off this, brand that, exile those who cannot repay, there are entire sections that hint at rituals and taboos designed to maintain cosmic balance. Some crimes were believed to anger the gods so deeply that ordinary punishment wasn't enough. People who practiced banned rites or invoked forbidden spirits weren't merely executed, they were erased, sealed away, or ritually bound. Babylon also had cults, secret sects, and religious splinter groups. Some openly tolerated, others ruthlessly erased from existence. The disarming of the soul, found in the vault's bone arrangements, aligns disturbingly well with rituals meant to prevent the dead from returning. If these rituals truly mirror what was in the vault, then someone in old Babylon believed something needed to be stopped from rising again. Once scholars compared the vault's carvings and symbols to known Babylonian texts, the parallels grew unsettlingly direct. Mesopotamian underworld beliefs held that the dead traveled through a series of gates, each guarded by terrifying beings. Rituals were carefully designed to prevent restless spirits from escaping and returning to plague the living. Some texts spoke of river spirits, entities invisible to the eye that moved beneath the waters, feeding on corruption and disease. The echoes of these ancient fears were disturbingly tangible in the vault, where toxic liquid pits mirrored those descriptions. Clay tablets detailed binding rituals, inscribed with symbols meant to silence, to bind, to forbid passage. When scholars saw the exact phrases carved into the vault's final slab, the uncanny match sent a chill through the room. Then there were the fragments, defaced centuries ago, that mentioned the Masaru, the Watchers or Guardians. Whether spiritual, human, or something in between, the texts insisted they were sealed away, never killed. And suddenly the vault's stark inscription, "Do not wake what was bound," felt far less metaphorical and far more like a warning. As history and archaeology collided, unsettling theories began to take shape, each more chilling than the last. Some suggested the vault was designed to contain an outlawed cult, a radical sect whose rites were considered so dangerous that the state either buried them alive or hid their remnants where no one could ever reach them. Others saw it as a mass execution site, where political enemies, sorcerers, or traitors were deliberately sealed as a grim warning to the living. Another line of thought proposed a more pragmatic, though equally eerie purpose. The vault could have served as a quarantine, holding victims of a deadly disease. The heavy metals and chemicals found within might have been crude attempts at sterilization, a desperate effort to halt contagion. Yet some scholars argued the intent was less physical than spiritual, a burial for the cursed or possessed. a ritual ceiling meant to prevent restless entities from escaping. And then there was the most controversial idea of all, that the vault was built for supernatural containment. Based on the cryptic symbols and meticulous arrangement, some believe it was designed at a time when myth and law intertwined. A period when Babylonians genuinely feared that something powerful, dangerous, and beyond comprehension needed to be bound deep beneath their city. Nobody agreed, but nobody dismisses any theory either, and that's the part that scares people. Even before the discovery of the vault, Babylon's early history was riddled with strange gaps. King lists went missing, populations suddenly dwindled, and entire districts were left unfinished. Ritual calendars shifted inexplicably, and religious texts were rewritten or destroyed without explanation. Taken individually, these anomalies were inconvenient curiosities. Taken together, they hinted at something far more deliberate, as if Babylon itself had been trying to erase or hide a chapter of its past. The vault now appeared as the most tangible proof of that forgotten history, a silent witness to secrets the city had long buried. As more researchers dug into Babylon's earliest rulers, one truth kept resurfacing, growing louder each time. The vault beneath Babylon wasn't crafted in haste, it was crafted in terror. Even today, academic institutions quietly disagree on how much of the vault's findings should be published. Some samples have been withheld, some reports mysteriously redacted. Ethical debates rage over whether such sites should even be opened again. But the haunting question remains: what were the Babylonians so afraid of that they sealed it beneath their city forever? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.